So these are the 4 parts that we are going to remove. First of all, the 90-degree hose. This connects right to the flange like this. It sits like this. The flange is sitting across on the block. We have the coolant temperature sensor as well, which is going to be changed. And then I have one of the hoses here, one of the heater core hoses. The reason I did think of changing them is these have seen better days and I can feel they're very, very soft. And I think there must have been oil on them before because they feel quite swollen. And then the other heater core hose right here. The screwdrivers that were used for the flatheads, the little ones, was specifically on this hose in order to actually grab the clip that's missing from here right now, and then just pry it open, spray some lubricant in it, and pull it right out. So that's our job for today. The tools that we're going to require for this job, these are all of the tools that I used in the video. However, you don't need to use all of these. This is just a handy kind of representation of everything that I was using. First of all, we're going to start with the picks. The picks are going to come in handy, especially if you can get a 90-degree ones. I used both, but you can just use one of these. This is to take off the coolant hoses off of the actual heater core to not damage the hoses. Then I have a T25 that we're going to be using. This is just to take off the intake portion when we are undoing everything. This is a T50 that is used for the coolant bleeding procedure. Then we have a 8mm and a 10mm, and as well as a 10mm wrench. The 10mm wrench was very handy when I was doing the coolant flange. Then we have a hex here. This is a hex 5 and a hex 6. You are going to use a lot of them. This is a 3/8 hexes. Then I have a small 3/8 extension and a large 3/8 extension. You will be using both of these together in order to undo the battery. Then we obviously have the wrench. Now, very important to note, the reason I have a 1/4" hex 5 here is because I actually had to use a little guy here when I was removing the EGR, because you have in a 3/8 is actually too big. You can also use the 90-degree hex that come in a lot of the kits as well. You should be able to get around using those to undo your EGR. Then we have some lubricant here, some silicone. Make sure to grab some silicone. You are going to use this to take off the hoses, to put the hoses back on, to make sure that you don't roll any O-rings in there. This prolongs the life of your actual O-rings. So make sure to grab a can of this guy or any paste, anything silicone that's safe to use with O-rings. Then we have a funnel for the coolant bleeding procedure. Then I have, this is a magnet here that was, again, handy to use if you have one. I have a box cutting knife here. This is if you can't take certain hoses off. This was also useful to use, but not necessary. Then I have a mirror. A mirror is a strong suggestion because you can't really see the coolant flange that well, and especially when you're checking for the leaks, so it's very handy to have. Then, of course, we're using gloves. If you don't want to ruin your regular gloves, make sure to grab some nitrile gloves and put those on when you're dealing with coolant. Then we have a couple pliers here. The adjustable ones were very handy for when removing the clips. These guys were a lifesaver for removing the Audi clips. Then we have some screwdrivers. The little guys were primarily used to undo the heater core hose that was on the left side where the intake is. So you do need a stubby flathead for that when you're undoing those, because you cannot get in with a big flathead. The big flathead I used on the other side to the actual flange to undo. And then the Phillips was used in order to take off the engine cover. And now, last but not least, obviously you need your coolant. I used half of this jug. This is a almost 4-liter jug. And then I also used an oil pan in order to drain the coolant once the flange comes off. There's a lot of coolant that comes out. And then if you have, make sure to grab a rag or two. And that's basically it. And now we can get to the job. Hello everyone. Just before we get started on this video, I wanted to make this quick little clip. This is after the job is done, to explain what I actually did. In the beginning, it is a little bit messy when I'm taking off the secondary air pump off, and as well as the EGR. So I wanted to kind of quickly run through this and explain to you what I actually did. So here, throughout this entire thing, the easiest thing to do is to twist this piece off. What I did is I just cut off the Audi clip here. Once you cut this out, you're able to maneuver it, twist it out, and then once you take the bolts off, you can just put it to the side here. For the bottom one here, as you can see, there's a little hose right there, and then the EGR. This pipe, they're both welded. There's a clip like this that's on the EGR, which I also cut, and then on that little guy right there, there was an Audi clip, which I also just cut. Once those two are cut, I was able to loosen this one, and this one came out pretty easily. Once this one came out, I was able to remove those super easy, just pop those out using some lubrication. and then move those to the side, and then we were able to get started on the job. For this 90 degree right here, it's kind of like a tension clamp, which you can squeeze through a little bump here on the actual metal pipe. I replaced that with a warm clamp just for the ease of access. And now let's get started to the video. So the parts that we're going to be replacing, obviously the most important, the actual rear coolant flange. And then since we're replacing the coolant flange, I thought I might as well replace the coolant sensor, because this sensor sits inside the coolant flange and it came with an O-ring. So I thought might as well do it. Then since there is also another hose, this 90 degree hose that goes into the coolant flange, since it's a rubber hose, mine looks like it's seen better days. So I thought I might as well replace this guy. And then the actual coolant flange, I have the part number right here and I will include it right on the screen. It's a DORMAN brand. And then I have the heater core hoses as well, because one of them goes into the flange and I realized that it's actually beginning to swell up. So I thought I might as well replace both of the heater core hoses as well, since I'm in there, since I need to drain the coolant. This is one of them. And then this is the second one. Before we get started, it's crucial that you make sure that your car is cold, that the engine had a few hours to cool down, because we're going to be working with coolant, and coolant is under pressure when you're operating a vehicle. So the best and the safest thing to do, first of all, is to crack open your expansion tank and make sure that you can open it without your coolant either hissing, boiling. So make sure that your car is nice and cold to the touch before you do start anything to do with your cooling system. First thing that we're going to do is remove the battery, because we need to access the heater core hoses, and we're going to be removing this cover as well. To remove the battery, it is quite simple. We just slide this guy out, and then we just have two 10 mils. But before we remove those 10 mils, we do have to pop this up and remove the weather stripping, because we have to remove this plastic cover out, and then this should just slide from right underneath, just like so. And then I see our heater core hoses right here, and I can tell they've definitely been through it. They feel very soft. Before we can remove the battery, there is also a 6 hex bolt that's holding the battery, and it's right kind of like in the middle of the battery. And also don't forget to disconnect this little breather out of the battery as well, and then the battery can come right out. And also make sure that when you are undoing the battery, you don't touch anything when you are on the battery, because it will spark and it can cause your ECU to say goodbye. Once we loosen this bolt, it's quite a long bolt, the whole bracket actually slides right out, and then we can pull the battery out. Out, comes right out like this, kind of sits in the battery like this, and it's holding the battery against this bracket. And now that the battery is out, we have access to our upper and lower heater hoses. And now what we're going to be doing is we have to take this bottle off to bleed the cooling system once we're done, but as well as to be able to reach the hose right underneath here. So first of all, we're going to take off our cover, then the wiring harness part to get it out of the way. Then we're going to be taking off this EGR. And then before you take the bottle off, just be mindful there is a sensor that's plugged into the bottle. This is a cooling level sensor. It's just a simple clip. You just unclip it and you just pull it straight down. Once that sensor has been unclipped, all you do is you kind of lift up the bottle here. Don't be afraid, you can tug on it and then you pull it right out. And that's it. Now the bottle is free and we have a lot of room to work on this. Good luck. But basically Audi and VDUB love to use these one-time use clips. And the only way to take them off is to just struggle and cut them off. I do have one right here that's not visible by the camera. I'm going to cut this one off. Once you cut these off, they are one-time use. You will need another warm clamp to hold it back down. So in order to remove these guys and the screws, this is actually a 5 hex. We're gonna start with this one first. And then once the top pipe comes out, it's gonna be 2 of them. So it's gonna be this one here and this one here. Once the top one comes out, we will be able to remove the bottom one here and then the bottom screw here. Once we remove the clip here, I'm going to remove this clip. My plan is to pull this guy out, this EGR. The best thing to do for these jobs, because the hoses have been on for a very long time, is using one of these guys to prevent damaging the hose. If you want to reuse these hoses, if you are struggling with taking these hoses off, regardless if it's, you know, the EGR, coolant hoses, spraying them a little bit with some sort of a lubricant will ease your job because they'll be able to creep in there and slide out. What I actually ended up doing is cutting off this clamp here, and then this guy was able to just slide out, and then I just moved it out of the way because I've struggled with this and it was just not coming out at all. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna remove this harness here, and then I'm going to figure this out because I do need to remove this guy, but I might just undo this hose and then undo the vacuum line on it and then pull it out. I'm not sure if I can remove this line just yet. So I'm just using a flathead, just twisting it a little bit, and then be careful with this harness because it is basically 2 decades old. And I'm just going to take this 10 mil out, and then I'm putting the bolt back in so I don't lose it, and then this harness can just be moved right out of the way. All I did was just took the harness off, took this line, slid it under, and then put this back. Now I can undo this guy. There is a little vacuum line right here that also will need to be cut because it's one of those Audi clips. And then undo this hex right here and then pull this top pipe out so we can remove the EGR valve. Once this comes out, there are 3 bolts and they're hex as well that are holding this actual EGR valve in. Be very mindful, there is a gasket that goes into it. Just to recap, what I decided to do is I loosened the 2 hex right here, undo, so again it's a hex 5. You can use the short one, I just have the long one. So now to remove this piece right here, this pipe from the EGR, the actual EGR hose, so I undid this worm clamp here. Then the hex that you have to remove is this guy right here, and then there's 2 8mm bolts that are actually holding this shield in place. It is bolted to the actual pipe. There's a piece right here, and then there's a piece right there that you need to remove. Also, this hex needs to come out. What I'm seeing is my actual bottom pipe here, which is an air pipe as well, I'm not sure, probably some EGR stuff, and the top one here are actually welded together. My plan is I also need to remove this hex for this pipe, undo this clamp right here, and then these 2 as an assembly will be coming out. And then I already undid this one and this one. I'm going to try, and this is again one of our lovely Audi clips here. I'm gonna try and cut it so I can remove it and then kind of fish out the hose from there. Besides taking the 2 8mm bolts from here, I am actually going to take out the 2 other 2mm bolts, 8mm bolts I mean. There's one more here and one more here. There's a total of 4 that are holding the shield together. There's also the O2 sensor that's held in, which I just can pop right out. I'm going to remove that just so I have a little bit more space here in the back. But even to cut one, I do need to kind of fish my hand around here and try and cut it. What I ended up doing is I was able to cut this clip by literally just fishing my cutters from the back and then kind of maneuvering it until I could get a little bit of a edge there, and then I moved it up, and then I was able to kind of free it up. So now that this is free up here and then this is free up here, I should in theory be able to just pull this guy out. Well, that actually was pretty easy. Literally just came right out, and then this guy was able to slide right out as well. And then I'll just put this on the side. It's probably gonna be easier if I do remove this shield. So there's those 8 on top, there's 1 8 on the bottom here, and then there's 1 8 kind of on the bottom hidden here. You might have to use an extension for sure on the 8mm here. Now that we have a little bit more access, this is where our EGR is hanging out. This little line, I think I'm actually going to just snip it right off because there's a little bit of an extra line here that can tug on. So if I snip it off, I can just undo it and then just put that line back in. To recap what I've done. First of all, we removed the cover, we removed the battery. Then I took off the harness for the coil packs and undid the 10mm bolt. Then I slid it out. I lift up the rail and I put it right behind here. Again, be mindful, it's an old harness. Then in order to pull this guy out here, what I did is I undid the 2 hex that were holding it right here, the 2 hex, or 5mm hex. Then I cut off the big clamp here because it was twisting easy out of it, but from the metal pipes, it just wasn't twisting at all. So I was like, well, the safer bet. Then once this was out of the way, I moved it out. Then in order to remove the other EGR part, this guy right here, I undid this clamp here, and then I cut off this clamp here because this is the Audi kind that needs to be cut. And then I also loosened this clamp, and this was actually able to slide out fairly easily with some lubrication. And then there was a one hex, there was two hexes, I believe they were right here. And then there was two 8mm bolts that were holding the heat shield in here. So then after I removed this pipe here, I unbolted the heat shield, 2 more bolts on the bottom here. For this one, I did have to use a little extension. It's extension because my socket was hitting the turbo and I was unable to actually put the socket on. And then for this guy, I was able to use without an extension. This came out, and now we are on the next step of figuring out this line here, and then we can remove our EGR and have access to our coolant flange finally. Box cutter, and I just cut that line right there, and then it's perfectly long enough for me to be able to reach it after and slap it back on. When you are undoing the EGR valve, your regular 3/8 5 hex is too long. There's 3 bolts that are holding it together. Your regular 5 is gonna be a little too long, and you won't be able to do it. So you need a smaller one for the actual back. Once you start, there is a plastic line. It stays in here like this. What you wanna do is just push it down and out, and then it'll easily come right out. It's by the coolant flange, literally covering one of the EGR bolts. Now I'll have more room to actually undo the bolts properly. It's a little tricky to remove, and probably your best bet, a 1/4 inch. Take your time with the hexes, but this is the gasket. You can kind of see it, it's right there. That's the gasket. So and then the bolts are quite long. It's very easy to strip those, and it's the last thing you want. So I do see the coolant flange. It has the coolant temp sensor in there, so I'm going to remove that. So there is our lovely coolant flange right there. The EGR sits right beside it. There's that other hose that's kind of like inside of it right there. It's a little hard to see, but that's that 90° that I'm also going to be swapping out. This sensor, so I'm going to just pull the plug out. For the bottom, as I'm looking through it right now, there's actually this line is also holding onto the flange. The flange itself sits in like this. This is your sensor here. This is that heater hose. And then this is that 90° hose that we'll be pulling out. Just be mindful, your car needs to be cold. Have a bucket underneath because the coolant is just gonna literally go everywhere. When you go and remove the coolant flange, basically this hose that was running into, again, some air stuff here, it actually sits on top of the coolant flange. You have your coolant flange. The best thing to do is use one of the mirrors, one of these guys. Use a mirror. See if you can locate it first before you touch it, just to kind of be aware of what it looks like. To remove the sensor, kind of the same way that we removed the coil packs, using some pliers and just moving this sensor. And then I literally just used a pick, and then all I did was I just went kind of under the sensor where the plug is. I'll show it on the big plug. I kind of went through like the inside and just picked at the actual like part that clips in, lifted it up, and then I was able to slide out, no issues. The reason I wanted to undo this before anything else is because this will give me a little more space as well to put that 10mm in and take that flange off. The flange is right there. So that's the 10mm bolt right there. And the flange itself is held on by the bolt down there, right there, and then that one up here, which, as I mentioned, is kind of sandwiched. I was struggling with the top part to use a wrench, so the ratcheting one. So I was just like, you know what, let me try a regular wrench, and it actually works better than anticipated. So for the top, I encourage you to use a regular wrench, and then for the bottom, either you can use the wrench or you can use a ratcheting wrench, whatever you feel. Bolt sticking out, that was a 10mm nut on the bottom, just a regular 10mm. You take that off in order to free up this line. There is 2 hex bolts. There we go. So now this is pretty free, and then I can literally slide it right away from that flange. Let me have a little recap here. So coolant flange. Okay, there are two studs that go into it. Now these two, there are 2 10mm that are holding them. And then on top of that, on the bottom one, You have the turbo line that the bracket for it that slides on. And then there's a 10mm bolt. And then to remove that, you remove the bolt, and then you remove the 2/6 hex that I just removed in order to kind of slide that line off. On top, you have your plastic line that's held in. You remove that 10mm, and then you still have another 10mm that actually holds the flange in. So there's 4 10mm bolts in total that are here, 2 on each side because of the brackets. Finally, we've reached the point of the actual flange. Again, the 2mm after you took off both of the top and the bottom bracket. This is what the 10mm studs look like when you pull them out of the flange. On top of the flange, you have the other 10mm that sits like this. It holds a bracket in, and on the bottom, you have another bracket, and then that 10mm is holding in. And then the coolant flange is ready to come out. Pull on it, and there we go. And I'm just gonna let it drain a little bit. So for that 90-degree hose, it's actually quite a big and easy hose to reach. It goes right into this metal pipe right here, and the hose is just in the back here. I pulled out the flange. Since we're replacing these, one of them is connected to the flange, but the other one is right there. So I'm not sure if it can visualize it. This guy right here. It's very easy once you remove the bottle. It's hanging out right here. Then when we unplug them both, there is this kind of like a cover. It's just a rubber piece that you just literally pull up, and that's it. Here's a very crucial step that I want you guys to pay close attention to. Heater core itself, some of them are very, very fragile. So these hoses can be bent. These aluminum pipes that come out can be crushed like there's no tomorrow. So the trick that I've learned is you gotta spray them as well, and also make sure to spray silicone when you're removing any like quick connect hoses. Then we're gonna use a pick, and we're gonna try and break that seal. So there's a little bump on the actual pipe itself. Go over that bump around the hose, break that seal. You know, these hoses have been on 20 years. And then I'm going to use a bigger one because I really, really wanna make sure that I'm breaking that seal in, and also I'm going to try and kind of twist them while I'm at it as well. But yeah, avoid putting pliers on these bad boys and twisting them, because you will break them. And be gentle. Now, all I'm gonna do is just remove this rubber piece in there. This hose is already loose. It's pretty easy. And then they both can come out from the top. It's actually not that bad. That's what it looks like. So it sits like this. All I did was to pull it from the grommet, grab both of them, yoink them out, and then the grommet comes right out. The way that these quick connects work, if you've never worked with them, all you need to do, slide. So for this one, I had to use a small flathead because of the limited space. For the top one, all you do, slide your flathead in like this. You lift it up. Honestly, the best thing I like to do is I just use my flathead, or if I can, I just remove them. Like this one, I was able to just kind of yoink out. And now you can kind of spray your lubricant in, and then you just pull them out. This is what it looks like once you pull the hoses out. One very important thing that I wanted to also kind of bring up to the attention is this doesn't look too bad actually, but it's very important to actually clean the surface to make sure that it's flat, so that when the O-ring sits, it actually seals it. Here, I might use a razor blade and just kind of be very, very gentle and just scrape off any material that's left residue. I kind of wanted to show just how I'm cleaning up the surface with a blade. All you do is, so let's pretend this is the flat surface. You just want to kind of put your blade on, lay it, and then just scrape. Don't apply too much pressure. Don't hold the blade where you know that it will kind of equal the pressure altogether, and then let the blade work. You don't want to keep it straight up, straight down like this onto the surface. You can scratch it just like this, and kind of let it slide. And then I just gently go over it. We don't want to like push it into the metal. We don't want to pretend that we're cutting something as well. The reason that I decided to do this job actually is, well, this coolant flange is notorious to go bad on these cars. And actually, funny enough, this was an OEM one, which means that sooner or later, the O-ring looks pretty flat to me, honestly. It probably would have started to leak anyways. I decided to also replace a 90-degree hose because, while we're at it, might as well. But also, upon further inspection, this looks very bad. It's not the worst, but you can clearly tell it's been through it when you compare counterpart. So the issue is when you can see the hoses are expanding like this, really expands, then you know that you're running into issues sooner than later. I noticed this was the coolant hose that was going into it. And again, same thing. This is actually very interesting the way this looks. This is also OEM. This hose feels very soft as well. It would have probably started to crack right here within the next couple of months because it feels very spongy right here and very soft. This was kind of my concern when I saw that it was expanding. This is why hoses break, is they end up expanding and they end up cracking. That's why they end up leaking. Comparing to this, for example, this doesn't look too bad. This is the other inlet. And as you can see, the clamp is sort of aligned with the actual hose and it feels much better than the other one. Pretend this is the flange. What you want to do is, although it might seem like there's deposits on it, what you want to do is run your finger around it and feel if it's smooth. You want to make sure there's no deposits around the flange. You want to make sure that when you're cleaning it, after you're done, it's all smooth and kind of one even surface. Fun fact, I'm looking at my old hose here. Make sure you have your metal clip right here. Actually, we need to make a hole in this guy. This hole on the OEM one is used to bleed the system. So I'm gonna measure approximately kind of like where the hole should be and then just tap a hole into it. The whole purpose is you slide the hose. So pretend this is the actual pipe. You slide the hose a little over from the pipe for the air to escape when you're bleeding, and then you just put the hose on it all the way. I'm going to apply lubricant on the actual hose ends. Very important, apply lubrication, this end, and then as well as when I'm gonna slide them in, I'm actually going to lube up the inside of this grommet. I made sure I lubricated the inside here so that they slide a little easier. I also drilled the little hole here, and then this is what it's gonna look like. Now on this step, very simple. All I'm going to do is just put some lubricant inside the hose here so it slides easier, and then some on this one, and then just put the clamps back on. So these clamps are gonna go back on, but this guy is actually going to not go on fully, but it's gonna go just halfway up until where that hole is, just for the air to escape when we're bleeding. And then on this side, very simple, again, putting silicone in and just attaching that hose back in. All I'm gonna do is, on that hose, is just open up the clip, and then it's just gonna slide right in. I make sure it's tight, close the clip, give it a couple little tugs just to make sure that it's in, and this side is all done, and then we can move on to the actual cooling flange. I'll do this for you guys on the floor, just for you guys to kind of see. Just gonna assemble that. And the most important thing is, again, we're going to lubricate that O-ring, the spot that it sits in. There we go. So the sensor is in. You know that the sensor is in when the gold part is under the part where the clip goes, because the clip holds the sensor inside like that. Once you've tightened your coolant flange on both sides, and I replaced my 90-degree angle hose and I've connected my bottom hose, be mindful if you are installing the plastic one, make sure that you're not tightening it too much. It is plastic at the end of the day. In terms of bleeding procedure, I'm actually going to try and bleed coolant right now to make sure that my flange is not leaking before I attach my EGR and my secondary air pump in. The bleeding procedure for these cars is quite interesting. You're supposedly able to bleed majority of coolant with the car being off by opening up this breather right here, and then the one that I had to make on my upper hose there as well. So this is not inserted all the way for that specific reason. And this is so I'm not sure what this is. This looks like a Torx. I used a T50 to crack it open, and I was able to do that. Supposedly you should be able to bleed this out when the car is off, and then you drive it a couple times and it should kind of bleed itself out for the majority. And then I'm just using some premix here. Now that I've bled kind of the majority, it worked in some videos, some it didn't. I thought I'd give it a shot. But our main kind of thing is our bottom hose right here, which would be the one that's in the flange. So I'm gonna make sure that nothing is leaking there. And if all that is good, then everything is gonna get assembled. Bleeding coolant in these cars is not the best activity known to mankind, but since I made sure that I opened up this bleeder and I was able to get rid of the air, the way I'm going to actually bleed it now is I put the hose back in here and I made sure that nothing is leaking so I can assemble everything. Then I will screw this bottle back in. So again, it kind of pushes in and goes down. Put the screw in here. Now that everything is done here, everything's ready to go. I'm just gonna wipe all that coolant in there, and then I'm gonna go back to the assembly. So make sure you plug in your coolant temperature sensor back in, and then you can start putting back in your EGR valve, which again, as I mentioned, it's your T5s that go in. However, you have to use a smaller one. Now that I've verified that nothing is leaking around here, we're just gonna slap that cooling sensor back on. Then I can assemble the line. So the top line right here, again, that slides onto the bolt. Now I'm going to attach this turbo line, again, slipping it back onto the bottom part of the flange. And then the turbo line bolts, which are a hex 6, just gonna go back in as well. So there's one here and one here. Now that we've verified that our flange is not leaking, and I already put in the top line, this guy here, and the bottom line into the bottom of the flange. So now let's go into the EGR. Before we do it, I am gonna cut our favorite Audi clip here. Do it away from yourself so that you don't hurt yourself. I'm actually gonna run a zip tie. I don't really care about EGR that much, but I'm just gonna put a zip tie on and I think it'll do just fine with it. Strong encouragement, make sure to start these bolts all by hand first. So make sure you have your gasket on. I am gonna move this line out of the way. The way we do it is push it down and out and it comes right out. It's very easy. Actually, I'm just moving this harness out of the way too. We are actually ready to put our shield in. For the shield, again, it is 4 8mm bolts. And if you're wondering, you know, oh, I forgot how my shield goes back. We need to make sure that it sticks out, facing out, because that's what holds in your O2 sensor. Also, another important, very important thing is the EGR has the line that we need to put back, the vacuum line. Next step is putting back the EGR pipe and as well as our secondary air pump. All we're gonna do is just spray some on here and then spray some in here. So I do have a clamp here. It's a little on the bigger side, but it'll do the job. Perfect. And then this one in all the way. Perfect. That's it. And then it's just a hex right here. And then there's one here. And then there's one right here. So there's 3 in total. Make sure you put that O2 sensor into its spot there. Before we put the secondary air pump in, we need to put the harness back in. Now, again, be very careful. They are very old. Again, here, we got the 10mm bolt that's waiting for us. And I can tighten that. That's just a little 10mm here. This is all done. And let's move on to our secondary air pump. Here, you will need a new clamp because we did end up cutting this one. It appears that the best place to undo these is from this part itself. Put another clamp here, and then a hex 5 here, and a hex 5 here. Oh, I need a magnet so bad. Where's my magnet at? All that's left to do here is just attaching the top piece of the intake. That's it. There we go. And now all that's left to do is just to put the battery back in and then just assemble the beauty cover in the battery and we'll be good to go. So I'm just holding the positive terminal of the battery away. Don't forget, the battery is secured with a Torx T6, and the way it sits in is, if this is the battery, it's facing this guy is on the opposite side of the battery. We'll need a little extension to actually screw it fully in, and then we'll just attach our terminals. So it quite literally just slides right under, and that's it. There we go. Then, before I attach the negative terminal, I'm just gonna put my beauty cover back on. And that's it. Now just attaching the negative And then I'm going to go for a drive, blast the heat on all the way just to make sure those hoses are, the coolant's being circulated once it fully heats up. That's basically the end of this video. I really hope that you learned something, and I apologize. This went a little south with taking off these hoses, but with the car being so old, it's kind of always a gamble as to what's going to be able to come off or not. If you have one of these, make sure to check your coolant flange as well. It's a very common issue on these cars and they love to leak, but overall it's a pretty decent job, I would say. I really appreciate you watching and sticking around. And if you like this video, make sure to subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.